Chapter 38. Alex woke bright and early on the morning of July 4th. She'd been looking forward to sharing her favorite holiday with Matt. Rolling over, she shook him. "Come on, it's time to get up." She hopped out of bed, grabbed the clothes she'd set out the night before, and disappeared into the bathroom. When she came out in her jeans and button-down Western shirt, he was standing beside the bed pulling a t-shirt over his head. "I'll go start some breakfast." "Don't bother, we're going out to breakfast." He stopped and turned to look at her, a frown creasing his sleepy brow. "Out." "Yes, out. Did I stutter? Come on. We'll be late." She pulled on her socks and stepped into her boots, before going back in the bathroom to pull her hair up. Hair done, she passed him as he went in the bathroom. "I'll meet you downstairs," she called as she left the room. Downstairs she checked her purse, cash, debit card, keys, schedule for the day. She mentally inventoried what they'd need, and made sure she'd loaded it all into her truck while he'd made dinner the night before. She'd set the timer for the coffee the night before, so she wouldn't have to wait for it this morning. When Matt finally came downstairs, she met him at the foot, handed him a cup of coffee and herded him out to the truck. "We're taking mine today, so hop in." She went around the driver's side and slid into the familiar seat. "Where are we going?" He took a sip from his mug and blinked several times. "I told you. Breakfast." She grinned while starting the truck and pulling out of the yard. 15 minutes later, she pulled into the lot at the local park. "Where are we?" Matt looked around, confused. "I told you breakfast." She leaned over and kissed his cheek before hopping out of the truck. She waited in front of the older pickup for him to join her. She didn't have to wait long. He still carried his half-empty cup. "I'm not so sure about eating at the park." "Suck it up, this is fun." She hooked her arm in his and pulled him toward the table where a jar sat for donations, dropped a folded bill inside, then towed him into the serving line. "Pancakes." He looked at the stack of plate-sized hotcakes they handed him. "Yep, the fire department does this every year. It's tradition." She took her plate and walked with him until they found an empty pair of seats at a table. They sat down, and she was several bites in before she noticed he wasn't eating yet. "Eat up, it's all you want, and we've got a busy day." She motioned with her fork while she talked. He looked around at the people all around them, then started eating. She left him with half a stack while she went back for more, stopping on her way back to joke with one of the firemen working. She recognized his face, she'd seen him around town, but she wasn't sure of his name. "What was that all about?" Matt said with a scowl as she sat back down. "What? You and that guy?" She frowned and looked back at the guy she'd been talking to. "Nothing, just making small talk. Seemed awfully friendly to me. Did you used to date him or something?" "No." She shook her head slowly, she had no clue where this came from and she was confused. "I don't even know his name." He frowned and went back to eating. When they'd eaten their fill and visited with the people Alex knew at the park, her parents, and several other members of the clan, they headed back to the truck. They were almost there when someone called her name. Alex turned to find Megan, a girl she'd gone to school with. Megan was rushing toward her, a baby strapped to her chest and toddler holding tight to one hand. "Alex, I haven't seen you in forever." Megan gave her a one-armed hug. "How are you these days? Are you married?" "Hi, Megan. I'm doing pretty good. Not married yet, but I'm okay with that. It may be coming, maybe not." She glanced at Matt standing beside her. "Megan, this is Matt." "Matt, this is Megan Sanders." "It's Watkins now." "Watkins then. We went to high school together." Megan went away to school. "I haven't seen her in years." She turned back to Megan. How have you been? Busy, Megan smiled and motioned to her children. I met a guy at ASU, got married and we're doing well. I'm sorry you were stuck here taking care of your parents' place. I'm not. I'm happy. I'm doing great. Alex smiled. Baby, we're gonna be late, Matt said from behind her. She didn't even think about him, not knowing where they were going next. She said goodbye to Megan and went to the pickup with Matt. Were you two close in high school? Matt asked once she'd started the truck and pulled out of the lot. No, we didn't really move in the same group. Why? She watched the road, there were kids all over and she didn't want to hit one. She wasn't as friendly as she seemed. What do you mean? The way she pointed out that you stayed to work the ranch while she went away to school and got married? Yeah? She thought she knew where he was going. Megan had never been a particularly nice person, and had always done her best to show you how she was better than you. She was trying to show off, baby. He dropped one hand on her leg. To make you feel inferior because you're still here and she's not. I know. She turned and flashed him a quick smile. But the joke's on her. I'm right where I want to be. She felt Matt's eyes on her for several seconds. You're serious, aren't you? She pulled up behind a line of cars at a stop sign, stopped and turned to look at him. Well, yeah. Why wouldn't I be serious? He stared back at her for several seconds, then shook his head. You've got no deception in you, do you? She moved up into the next spot as the car in front of her moved, then she looked back at him. I don't know what you mean. No. He shook his head. I guess you don't. She felt his eyes on her for several long seconds. You really didn't know that guy at the park, did you? What guy? That one you were talking to at the park. You mean the firefighter? Yeah, you really didn't know him, did you? No. She blinked several times then looked at him. You didn't believe me? He sighed. I didn't know what to think. He dropped his head and looked down at his hands, folded in his lap. You were friendly and flirty and something inside me reared up, and I was so freaking jealous I couldn't see straight. He looked back up at her, meeting her gaze. I'm sorry for how I acted. It was her turn and she watched traffic until there was a break, then pulled out onto the highway. You don't have anything to be sorry for. The trip wasn't very long, but the heavier than normal traffic made it take about twice as long as normal. 15 minutes after leaving the park, she pulled into the parking lot of the rodeo arena. I thought the rodeo didn't start till afternoon. It doesn't, but this is too sweet to miss, come on. She got out and waited while he did the same. Meeting him at the rear of the truck, she took his hand and walked with him to the grandstands. She found them an empty spot. It wasn't hard. While there were more than a few people in the stands, they weren't packed. It will start in a few minutes, just sit down and wait with me. She rubbed her hands together then took one of his in hers. She wove her fingers in between his, and scooted close enough that their thighs touched from hip to knee. So what are we waiting for? Matt looked at her then out toward the arena. I'm not going to spoil it. You're just gonna have to wait and see. She was impatient for it to start, though she knew that it tended to start a few minutes late. She jiggled one knee while she waited. Matt put his hand on her leg, stopping the bouncing. You're full of energy this morning, aren't you? It's the sugar and the excitement. Why are you so excited? He looked around then pulled his hand free and wrapped that arm around her, giving her his other hand to hold. I love this. She looked up at him. Almost more than the real rodeo. I always have. She looked back to the arena. Oh, they're starting. She was on the edge of her seat. Look! Look! They were getting the first kid on the back of his sheep. He held on for dear life as they let the sheep go. It ran away, jumping and kicking at the unfamiliar weight on its back. Mutton busting? Matt asked. She'd forgotten that he'd grown up in a small Texas town and hadn't lived in Denver all his life. Being from Texas, he'd know what mutton busting was. You're this excited over mutton busting? She looked at him and blood rushed to her face. He tilted his head and looked at her a moment longer. You love kids, don't you? He fell silent. How bad do you want a baby of your own? She looked away. She didn't want him to see anything in her face. Yeah, I like kids. She avoided his other question.